Soccerex Connected, Ben Jacobs with you, 5 o'clock here in London. We've got a global audience, almost 100 countries represented, over 2,500 delegates. And this is the second edition of the world's biggest digital conference. It's great to engage with all of you. Make sure you talk to the exhibitors via the app, and the full schedule is available on there as well. Today, we are focusing on commercial broadcasting, advertising, and everything else around this fascinating area. The same theme tomorrow as well. And our presenting partner is Teamworks. And as a consequence, we are asking you which two footballers just work well together. And you can tweet us at Soccerex. Please use the hashtag SoccerexConnected. And in doing so, you enter the draw to win a signed shirt of your choosing from the vast array we have here at Soccerex HQ. Jean-Pierre Papin, Carlos Alberto from Brazil still available as well. Laurie Lindsay, US Women's National Team, and many, many more. Check out at Soccerex for all the details. But why don't you just give me a pairing of footballers that just work well together? They can be current teammates, historical, or you can go totally fictional and pick two players that didn't play together but might well complement each other. Thanks to Callum for being in touch. He says Gattuso and Pirlo. That's a great answer there. Opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of style, but work perfectly in tandem together. They won many Serie A's, Champions Leagues, World Cups together as a midfield duo, and as Callum puts it, an artist and a battering ram at work. That's really well put. So at Soccerex, use that hashtag SoccerexConnected. And a reminder that we're back tomorrow from 11:30 GMT when we'll have Soccerex Fast Forward, and we'll look ahead to the day. Myself, Ben Jacobs, alongside Patrick McCrenna, the head of sales and marketing here at Soccerex. So let's move on now to our 5 GMT panel. It's the best named panel of the entire week, and it's called Will This Be Controversial? You can bet on it. So Charles, who's behind all of the wording, gets a little bit of a pay rise for this one. And it focuses on betting, as the name suggests. Football's relationship with the betting industry is very uneasy. And actually, there was a great article only a couple of days ago written by Joey Durso in The Athletic talking about Asian gambling firms and how Premier League clubs that have them on their shirts know almost nothing about them. So do check that out. And what we're going to delve into within this panel is whether teams should be able to endorse gambling and ultimately commercialize from it, or if the relationship potentially preys on the vulnerable and ultimately exposes a lack of integrity because it opens the industry up to things like match fixing. So how can football best coexist with betting? To discuss, we are delighted to welcome Pedro Trengrouse, the lawyer at Trengrouse and Goncalves, Laila Mintas, the CEO of PlayUp, Lee Calverley, Sports Integrity League at Entain, Emanuel, Macedo, de Medeiros, Global CEO of Sport Integrity Global Alliance, and recently inducted to the B20 as well. Congratulations on that. And our moderator is from Epic Consultancy, their head of delivery. It's a very good evening to Mark Potter.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel, where we're going to explore football's relationship with gambling and discuss whether we currently have the right balance, or if indeed there needs to be greater scrutiny, regulation and awareness. As said, my name is Mark Potter, former professional athlete and disordered gambler, and now head of delivery at Epic Risk Management. And I'm obviously delighted to be hosting today. To help me with today's panel, I'm joined by a fantastic panel from various backgrounds across the globe, and will help provide some more insight into this interesting and relevant topic. As said, we have Lee Calverley, Lead Integrity Officer at Entain. We've Dr. Laila Mintas, CEO of PlayUp and former Deputy President of Sport Radar US. We have Emanuel Medeiros, CEO of Sports Integrity Global Alliance and current member of the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And finally, Pedro Trengrouse, lawyer and Vice President of the Brazilian Bar Special Committee on Gaming Law. So I'm sure you'll agree it's a great panel. And look, football and gambling has, I guess, for many years been intrinsically linked, and millions of customers around the world enjoy the occasional punt to give their chosen games a little added incentive. However, more recently, we're seeing increased scrutiny on the relationship between the two, and there are growing calls for much stricter regulation, with particular focus on the promotion, sponsorship and marketing of gambling companies and the perceived gamblification of football. Indeed, very recently, England international Kieran Trippier was banned for 10 weeks for his involvement in a football betting integrity scandal, which again only further muddies the waters between those relationships between football and gambling. And I guess this therefore begs the question, revenue versus responsibility, and do we have the right balance? Because on one hand, we see massively increased sponsorship from gambling companies with logos taking centre stage on front of matchday kits. We see clubs and leagues having official betting partners, including in the US, with specific gambling retail outlets inside stadia. And then now we see on TV and on billboards around the grounds what some would say, I guess, is over-the-top marketing and advertising of the gambling companies and the products. I think these are what many people see as the negative side of football's relationship with gambling. One thing we must do, however, and is of the utmost importance, is to ensure that no children are exposed to gambling and the normalisation of gambling in any way. I think latest research cited that even a 3-year-old child called a teddy bear Betway because of watching football on TV and the sponsorship of West Ham United. I think exposure to kids at an early age can certainly exacerbate the probability of gambling disorder later in life. And that is according to sort of the latest research. There is obviously, of course, the other side of things and the more positive side of things, where gambling operators are happy to sponsor sports teams, especially in the current climate where I guess for many teams, the very survival can often depend on this means of funding. We also see some operators commit significant funds to projects within grassroots football, such as Entain, and for which I'm sure Lee is going to expand on that in a moment. And then there are also various what you would call harm minimization programs that occur around the world, dedicated to raising awareness of the risks associated to gambling, raising awareness of social responsibility and other vital topics, including sports betting integrity and responsible marketing. So I guess if we start with you, Lee, just give us an insight and a brief illustration, if you can, of some of the socially responsible programs that you were involved in within football and sport in general, and how you were ensuring that, I guess, these have a positive impact on clubs, leagues and governing bodies alike.
Sure, Mark. Hi, everyone. So there's 3 campaigns that I want to touch on quickly that we at Entain are involved in. So the first one is called the Pitching In campaign. So that was a sponsorship that we launched last year, which supports tiers 7 and 8 of the English football pyramid. So not two steps of the non-league pyramid in the UK. Now with that, there is no brand marketing or awareness involved. We are helping those leagues through what is obviously a tough time with the coronavirus situation. And as part of that, we're delivering educational programs on responsible gambling and sports integrity to all the clubs and their players. Secondly, I want to touch on the agreement we have with the Professional Players Federation in the UK. So they are an overarching body for a number of the players' bodies, and we support them annually with their anti-match fixing education campaigns. So that's a financial commitment, and we also deliver some education sessions ourselves to athletes. For example, last year we worked with athletes at a rookie camp for one particular sport. And then finally, the last campaign I want to touch on, which is in partnership with Mark's organisation, Epic. We recently committed to a large-scale nationwide campaign to educate US college athletes around responsible gambling and sports integrity.
That's great stuff, Lee. Thanks a million. And also, I think secondly, I recognise that Entain is committed to becoming the most socially responsible operator. Do you think enough has previously been done to ensure customer protection? And what measures are you now putting in place to achieve that goal that you've set for yourselves?
Sure. I think looking back at the past, there's always lessons that can be learned. And like you say, we have committed to be really proactive in this area and to become the most socially responsible operator. So last year we launched what's called our ARC program. So that stands for the Advanced Responsibility and Care program. And this is introducing much more technology into the sphere of our responsible gambling monitoring, real-time monitoring and player analysis tools. And that allows our staff to identify, I suppose, markers of harm with our customers who are betting, and to, I suppose, stage different levels of intervention depending on the circumstances at different stages. And secondly, another commitment that we made last year as a company was we are in partnership with Harvard Medical School. We committed over £5 million to a 5-year program to study problem gambling, and almost find ways to prevent it. And once it is identified, look at different ways to treat the problem.
Yeah, that's great stuff, and certainly very much needed. And I can only vouch for the US program that we're currently running in collaboration with you guys, in the fact that we're being able to educate what is one of the highest risk populations, which is obviously elite sportsmen and young college athletes. And I think initially the feedback from that has been fantastic. And the idea of that is to prevent harm and prevent any future issues. And it's, from my perspective, it's been a really positive engagement. So thank you very much for that. I guess if we come to Emanuel next, look, you've significant experience and insight into this topic from your time as CEO of various football governing bodies around the world, and now the Sports Integrity Global Alliance. Is enough currently being done to protect both the integrity of the game and also to ensure football's relationship with gambling is not contributing or indeed promoting gambling harm within society?
Thank you very much for the question, which comprises several questions and several issues in one. I would say that if the relation between sport and sports betting and the sports betting industry would be a sea of roses, we would not be having this conversation. And it's because there are massive challenges and long overdue reforms and the lack of dialogue and constructive collaboration between all sides of the industry, aggravated by the exponential growth of criminal infiltration, of money laundering, of tax evasion, in a complete and deplorable example of lack of leadership, that we are having these conversations. And we need to have a tough conversation, eyes on eyes, without any euphemisms and without any ambiguity. I have been engaged in this problematic for over 20 years. Since the days of, I used to call two worlds apart, when between sport and the sports betting industry, there was no dialogue, there was no recognition, there was no bridges, nothing, only antagonism, to the second phase, the phase that I call the clash of the titans, where both sides, instead of finding ways to collaborate and common ground, strengthened their positions, entrenched themselves, and fought on every corner and on every ground, be it in the courts, be it in the public sphere, or in the corridors of Brussels, where important decisions were expected to happen. So the third phase, which we are now, I call it no man's land. I call it no man's land because whilst I recognize important strides have been made, and to that end, both from the legislative front as well as the industry, the self-regulation, the proactive stance that many stakeholders have adopted, including those that are here represented. But in reality, if we squeeze it, what do we have left? What are the results? And the results are worrying because you do not have still a united front to safeguard, first of all and foremost, the integrity of the game, because without integrity, there is no business, and without business, there is no profitability. So forget about sports betting and many other lucrative, legitimate activities. Integrity, one. And second, the way the sports betting market operates is still a long way to go to the ideal world. We had hopes that the US market would learn from the failures of the European experience, but I have to say that I am disappointed so far, although I believe that the US stakeholders, both the leagues and the sports betting market, being pragmatic as they are, will find a way to overcome this situation. But it's a situation where emphasis is placed on how much money it can give, how much money we can get from sponsorship deals or from licenses, without placing at the top of the agenda the essence, the soul of every sport activity, which is reputation and integrity. Again, I think it was not by accident that Charles invited me to this panel and has chosen the team for this topic as being controversial, because we have to be controversial. We are not here just to say nice things about how glamorous and the potential of the sports betting industry and the wider sport, without addressing the elephant in the room, without addressing the key challenges. And those, I repeat, despite strides being made, despite legitimate efforts by a substantial part of the industry, we are still far from positioning ourselves in a way that we can respond effectively to the passion of the fans, to the legitimate aspirations of the investors, you know, and the overall credibility of the industry in which we are also agents. So for me, a silver bullet, if we want, exists. And we have worked relentlessly with a number of stakeholders to implement it. It's called the SIGA Universal Standards on Sports Betting Integrity. You don't need to invent the rule. You just need to implement those standards and submit yourself to independent scrutiny, which is the ultimate test to credibility of any organization. And I want to thank also several of my fellow panel members, colleagues, who have also been engaged with us for a long time in this effort moving forward. So I want to be constructive, acknowledging the positive strides made, but we have to be honest with ourselves. In a moment where everything stopped, where all the reforms that were in the pipeline have been blocked by the global pandemic and the constraints that came with it, the only progress that is being made, I'm sorry to say, but has been unscrupulous individuals taking advantage of the vulnerabilities of the whole system for their own personal selfish gain. Whether this is called organized crime or some other name, but that is the reality. And the sooner we mobilize our active efforts and take action, the sooner we'll be able to regulate the market properly and supervise it the way it is needed, so that sports betting operators can also safeguard their reputation against unfair anathemas, and the leagues, the clubs, the players, all the participants in the game can exert their activity with proper training, with measures that prevent illegal and unlawful betting, with measures that ensure the protection for the consumers, including, as you mentioned, the children. And that implies a number of regulatory measures that have been identified a long time. And this is why every day that goes by that we are not giving a step forward, in reality, we are giving a kilometer or a mile backwards.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And that is regrettable.
I would agree with that, Emanuel. And a lot of the things that you said throughout that really interesting piece is it seems to be there's a lot of clashing heads between different stakeholders, and there's not a lot of working together and a lot of collaboration. And as is often the case in any type of society, if that is the case, you very rarely end in a positive outcome. So I think that begs the question, do all these stakeholders need to work together more and better and more collaboratively? Absolutely. And I think that will probably end in a more positive solution. And sort of interested that you mentioned the US, because I think that's probably moves on to our next point with Laila. I think, look, and this from predominantly for our US based audience, you will be coming at this from, I guess, a US focused perspective, Laila, and a slightly different angle as CEO of a US based gambling company, but also previously the deputy president of Sport Radar. And there have been many changes recently with the legalization of sports wagering across many states in the US. And I guess with this, there have been concerns that this may affect the integrity of sports in a negative way. Can you give us an idea of the current landscape in the US currently in terms of sports relationship with gambling? And additionally, and what is the role that operators can play in protecting the integrity of sport and football in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, everyone. So here in the US, we still have a very young market. So sports betting has been legalized for not even 3 years now. And almost half of the states have legalized sports betting, on process of legalizing sports betting. So we have a state-by-state regulation here. You really need to see the US as 50 different countries. Every state has their own regulation when it comes to safeguarding the integrity, when it comes to other restrictions for operators, when it comes to responsible gaming. And we as an operator at PlayUp, but then also every other operator that wants to get into the US or is already here, has to comply with regulations that the regulator in the particular state is dictating us, right? So interesting enough, the US has fight for a long time to get sports betting legalized. The leagues traditionally were against it, as you probably might know. Also outside the US, we had a law passed by that was repealed. And then since then, and the leagues were against that, right? So they tried to avoid that betting gets legalized over here. And then the moment betting got legalized, they turned around and said, okay, how can we now in the new world, in the new environment, benefit from sports betting? What is our role? And they started doing, implementing or trying to implement integrity fees first, because they said, okay, safeguarding the integrity is so important. We want to have a certain percentage of what the bookmakers are making in terms of revenues, because we have to put that money into the integrity programs. I mean, from my perspective, the integrity needs to be always the first priority for everyone, from a league's perspective, of course, but also from an operator's perspective. And when it comes to sports integrity, there are so many facets to it. If we're speaking about match fixing, for example, that people really influence the outcome of the game, and then there are bets placed on those fixed outcomes, the operator is always the one that pays out, right? So we are the one having at the end the financial loss. But it's much more than financial loss here. It's really that people get involved with organized crime. So the athlete gets approached by criminals, often threatened with their lives, lives of their families, etc. But then also sport loses their reputation. If we know that sports gets fixed, nobody want to watch sports anymore. At the end of the day, here in the US, we're in a very young market. So it's just about to develop step by step. And we should take the learnings from overseas when it comes to responsible gaming, when it comes to safeguarding the integrity. And I used to work in a high executive role also at FIFA and CONCACAF. And we always discussed what should the relationship be between sports and sports betting? And should we monetize data? And as we now see in the US, that leagues are selling their data. And you have, as a bookmaker, you can take official data because it's officially mandated by the league, to avoid that you don't have the data that is probably has a high standard. So there are many discussions here in the US about integrity fees, official data that operators should use to avoid or to safeguard the sports integrity. I haven't seen those discussions outside the US too much, so that's interesting. I was always on the impression that the US will not copy and paste what's out there in the world, but it makes sense to see how we can benefit from learnings overseas and then apply it to the US environment.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I guess as a new market, you can take things from the more mature markets, but I think that can be the mistakes and the positives. And I think that's a really important thing. And from our sort of first 12 months of insight into what the US market looks like, I think it's clear and obvious that the influx of money in sport from gambling operators is only going to grow. But I think with that, they then must ensure that they're also providing a duty of care. And whether that be through educational programs such as the one we're running, or whether it's through responsible advertising and marketing, or the non-promotion of harmful products to the vulnerable, I think they must take that really seriously. And I think that if they do, then it can be a successful sort of collaboration and partnership. If they don't, then I think you will see an awful lot of people harmed. And I think there will very quickly become a lot more scrutiny on regulators, operators, leagues, organizations around getting the balance right.
Yeah, the problem that I'm really seeing, I mean, you as an operator, you work with great players in the market like US Integrity or Swimmer. So we have those integrity organizations that help you monitoring what's going on in your sports. Of course, my former company, Sportradar, Sport Genius, all those companies are involved as well and do monitoring on behalf of the leagues. Well, when it comes to match fixing, I think everyone, all the different stakeholders have to work together. There are certain things that just the operator can see in their own offerings. They have to inform the regulator, of course. We work with US Integrity. We have a relationship with Swimmer and other organizations to make sure if something happens, we see it, and we make sure it gets reported to the regulator. Then the regulator has that relationship with sports and law enforcement, right? And has to give that information to law enforcement to take the next step. Sports itself can only do and only investigate what's under the sports umbrella. So if people come and approach athletes, sports can go and interview the athletes and see how they can investigate match fixing, but they cannot go out and investigate against third parties that come and approach the player. So it's really a hand-in-hand working situation that we need. And only if all the different players understand the risk, we can make sure that that everything is done that's needed to safeguard the sports integrity and the vulnerable.
Yeah. I think, again, it just highlights, again, the need for a joined-up, collaborative approach to tackling all of these potential risks and to mitigate them before they do become more of an issue and get out of hand. I think looking at that and looking at the balance, I think, Pedro, if I come to you from a sort of legal perspective, what is your viewpoint on the subject of ensuring there is the right balance between the revenue generated from gambling versus ensuring responsibility?
Well, first of all, thank you, Soccerex, for inviting us all, and congratulations on the event. It's always a pleasure being here, and especially listening to the eloquent speech of Emanuel, because he brings the experience of someone fighting for international regulation on sports betting and sports integrity that we still lack. I mean, we really need to work together on it. But for better or for worse, sports betting is now part of the game. And if you look at the way people engage in watching a football match, for instance, betting is the most engaging form of supporting a team nowadays. And when you mentioned that we have this imbalance, it is now a massive and largely underestimated multi-billion-dollar industry that profits on the back of sports organizations and has a dark side that both undermines the integrity of sports and causes tremendous negative social impact worldwide. And it needs to be addressed. Emanuel, again, has a research made with Sorbonne, pointing out that there are 8,000 websites offering online sports betting, and now it's in a volume over $3 trillion. Just to give you a perspective, in the last World Cup in Russia, the volume in betting on the World Cup matches was over 136 billion euros. If you add up all revenues FIFA had with the World Cup, all TV rights, sponsorship, ticketing, FIFA had 6 billion euros, more than 20 times less the total volume of bets in the World Cup matches. So I look at it and I say, well, you have now a big challenge, which is how sport can really not only protect itself, but also make money from it, especially when we see money from TV not coming in the same way it used to, because you have internet taking part of the publicity revenues. So sports should have a different approach to sports betting. And I don't know how, but maybe even having their own sports books with all these Chinese walls that needs to be in place in order to avoid conflicts. But we cannot just turn a blind eye to it from a sports organization's point of view. We need to look into it closely and find a way to have the content, the sports content, rewarded for its use in sports betting websites. And just to close my first participation in this panel, I just wanted to bring to you, well, I cannot share my screen, no problem. But then there is a case last year where punters fall victim to ghost game match fixers, which means during the pandemic, when there was no football being played, some websites and sports books offered ghost matches for people to bet. And I'm not talking about small companies. There is an article at the Times in England saying that William Hill and Ladbrokes offered markets on a tournament that never took place in Ukraine. So it goes much beyond fixing a match. They are now offering ghost matches as well. We need to look at it because it doesn't help sports, it doesn't help society, and we need to find a way to make the most out of the opportunities ahead while protecting the essence of sports that keep it alive. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's right, and it's clear and obvious that gambling and football has changed over the last few years, certainly with the increase in online play. I think if I look back to 20 years ago, the way you gambled on football was to go to certainly in the UK, was to go to a retail betting outlet. You walked in, you picked up your coupon, and you could either bet on a game to be a win, a loss, or a draw. Nowadays, you can go online and there are up to 170 markets on every game of football, which can be the amount of corners taken, over and under goals, goal scorers, red cards, yellow cards. There's so many markets. And that presents opportunity, and ultimately money is flooding into the game from bookmakers. And if it's done with balance and in the right way, then that's fine, because it is fundamentally keeping football alive to a certain extent at the moment. However, we absolutely must ensure the duty of care. And I think if I look at it from my Epic risk management standpoint with my Epic hat on, we're ultimately a company founded by and based on lived experience of gambling harm. Up to 50% of our staff have suffered from huge gambling disorders and had careers ruined, whether that in sport, suicidality, loss of job, family relationship breakdowns. That's the real negative side of things if you don't get the balance right. And I think we would always say that firmly believe that more can and should be done when it comes to preventing harm. I think all stakeholders must take responsibility to ensure gambling is not promoted to the vulnerable, as we've suggested, like young people, like disordered gamblers, like the highest risk populations in society. And I think if we protect that in terms of football, that is only a good thing. And as a company, we certainly support the upcoming Gambling Act review in the UK, which we're hoping will make things safer and fairer for people, because that is ultimately what needs to happen. I think we also recognise the importance of the programmes and initiatives. And as Lee said, we do engage in these programmes and we deliver what we believe to be absolutely fit for purpose harm minimisation programmes, which is protecting and preventing harm. And I think it really shows that we must have balance between the two. So I think if we come back to Emanuel, do you think football's relationship with gambling needs to change? And if so, what is the one thing you would do to improve public perception?
I think actions speak louder than words. That answers straight to your question. Actions speak louder than words. It's not enough to say that we value sport, we love sport, and we believe that sport is clean and fit for purpose and serves this noble ideal which everyone recognizes. But in reality, sport is under siege. Sport is under siege. And there has been too much talk and little action. It almost reminds me of that tune from Elvis Presley. But jokes aside, if we want important examples were given by my colleagues in this panel, urging not only action, but concerted, coordinated action. This is what is needed. And that starts with dialogue. And that involves cooperative spirit, right? Synergies and a united front so that we can pursue a global strategy and implement it accordingly. Because we are talking about global challenges. And global challenges, this is a no-brainer, but global challenges require global solutions, concerted, coordinated action. Number one, this is lacking. There was a reference to let's say the intention of the leagues to charge for official data. Why this official data is crucial? It is crucial precisely to avoid problems such as the one Pedro mentioned, the fake games. The fake games. So if you have official data delivered and guaranteed by the competition organizer as legitimate and truthful, you will avoid fake matches, because fake matches are only happening because those who gather the results of the competitions and the data probably do not have the credentials in many cases to do so. So credible information, certified official data is crucial. And obviously, because we are talking about IP rights, we are talking about content. That is not free for all, because the leagues and other competition organizers, to organize their competition, they have to invest massively. And now they have to invest also in protecting the integrity of their competitions against all this myriad of new threats that also led by technology advancements are putting sport in great danger. Think about individual sports like tennis, for example. It's very difficult. So again, the whole industry needs to come together and address this collectively and agree on concrete actions to be tackled. Regulation is always the solution rather than prohibition, but regulation implies rules and procedures, including which types of bets can be offered, because not all types of bets are legitimate. Some of them even induce and instigate ethical breaches on the pitch, and that cannot be allowed. Bet to lose, certainly it's against ethics. Also, the maximum amount that can be bet in order to avoid the risk of money laundering and other financial crimes and ensure transparency and prevent the detrimental action of organized crime, always seeking gaps and loopholes to launder the procedure of their criminal activities. We need training and education of all participants. We need code of conducts that also establish prohibitions. It is unthinkable, for example, and I've been saying this for many years, a player to place a bet on his own game or a direct relative, because it distorts the ethical principle inherent to every sporting activity and creates, of course, inadmissible conflict of interest.
Yeah. I would agree.
And then, excuse me, I will finish. And then acknowledging again that there are many people, many organizations willing to roll up their sleeves and work in this solution. I want to say to the owners of all this, the international organizations and the big international federations and etc., that in this fight, no one is exempted and no one should be excluded. If we really want to tackle this, it is a duty to embrace all collaborative efforts, because we are not enough to tackle these new waves of challenges that undermine the credibility of our game and in detriment to its social and economic role. So I appeal directly, and since we have here also a number of listeners and viewers from the US, I appeal directly to the US organizations to join SIGA, to join our efforts, because we are the only organization that has this global reach and has this global mission. And you do not avoid problems just stopping in US border. So the solution has to be global if we want to tackle global problems and ensure top level entertainment and a legitimate business activity to everyone involved. It's not a moral issue. It is a mere common sense issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It again just highlights how much more still needs to be done. I guess if we sort of come to you, Laila, again from a US perspective, is there a recognition of the collective responsibility that we just spoke about, that all stakeholders playing in keeping athletes, organizations, and consumers protected?
I think the major leagues in the US have done a really good job in monitoring their sports for a long time. As I said earlier, they came up with the idea of official data, which I haven't seen anywhere else in the world before. But then also, I mean, there are certain sports that are probably more in the focus here. I mean, if we are now speaking about football, honestly, I think there is some structural change that's needed. If you look into the organizations, how FIFA and CONCACAF are organized, other sports, other sport franchises, I should say, there is not enough transparency, and it starts from the top and it goes down to the smallest league. And I think the structure around that has to change. What Emanuel said, I think, makes sense. There need to be a global alliance somehow across the world. It sounds like a big thing to do, but if you look into doping, the World Anti-Doping Body kind of like has a global reach as well, and we need something like that for integrity. And I've been like dealing with sports integrity and sports betting since 2006. And if I see like what has changed in the meantime, it's sad to say, but there's not much that has changed. Speaking about the US in particular, I think the regulators here have done a good job in giving sports some restrictions. So for example, Emanuel mentioned that we need to have a clear idea of which sports takes place when. For example, in the US, the regulator gives you a list with all the sports that you can offer on the sports betting market, and that's it. So you cannot offer something that's not on the list of the regulators. And that kind of like helps safeguarding the integrity for sure. On the other hand side, looking at it with the eyes of an operator, that also limits you in what you can offer and how you can be innovative in this space. So I think from an operator standpoint, we have to find the right balance. But of course, it needs to be the highest priority to safeguard sports here. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, actually, a question has just come through from the audience, which is, it's clear that the US sports leagues are taking a huge hands-on approach with gambling. While cynically, this is for profit reason, but what can be done by leagues and teams to build sustainable partnerships from the ground up? And that's a great question. It's something that obviously Lee spoke about with the partnerships that we had, such as ones with ourselves, where we're going in and educating athletes and clubs and organizations on the risks and dangers around gambling, risks and dangers of irresponsible partnerships and sports betting integrity. So that is a huge step forward. I think by partnering and collaborating with integrity units, such as data collection units, such as Sport Radar, prevention sort of companies like ourselves, I think, again, it just highlights the collaborative approach that is needed, and not just from individual clubs, from leagues and organizations in general, to actually push the correct and the responsible messages out towards clubs that are engaging with these sponsorships. And it's a great question. I think just coming to you, Lee, just around that integrity thing, could you just expand on this from an integrity perspective and I guess explain how vital it is to ensure football's integrity is protected and the part that you guys as an operator plays in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's been touched on. The future for us as operators and for the sport, football, without fair and clean competition, the future is quite bleak. So it's very important that we do all that we can to assist football and sport in general with their, I suppose, match fixing investigations, And that can be as simple as alerting them to suspicious activity as soon as we see it. That can be after we identify suspicious activity, we can work with them on their casework. We can appear at hearings, we can provide evidence, we can give them betting data. We are uniquely positioned in that we can see which customers have bet. So we know who the customers are, who they are linked to. So that's the kind of information that we can supply. And then just on a more day-to-day level, we obviously take a lot of risk-based decisions every day in terms of what markets we offer, what leagues that we offer, what competitions that we offer. So this is, the integrity piece is something that operators are very keyed into, and that's something that we risk manage every day that we're working.
Yeah, it's a really important piece, and actually fundamentally one of the most important parts of the service as an operator, because if we're not protecting the integrity of the game, then I guess the whole point of this conversation is kind of null and void. And just sort of to come to you, Pedro, to finish off, in light of what's been said, should there be a more joined up approach between operators, clubs, governing bodies, and to tackle these current issues, and whose responsibility is it?
Yes, and I just wanted to build up on what Laila brought related to doping. It was a very fortunate thing that you just mentioned, because the International Convention Against Doping in Sport is the most successful convention in the history of UNESCO in terms of rhythm of ratification. It was very, very fast. And why? Because sports organizations were involved, and they said that countries not signing this convention wouldn't be able to participate in international competitions promoted by them. So Emanuel calls upon these sports organizations to put their weight in this need to regulate sports betting as well, because if they come, all countries will sign a convention, because they will not be out sports competitions if they don't sign. So if they don't sign, they cannot compete. It's something that sports can do. It has already done for doping, and it could do for betting as well. Laila was very, very happy bringing it up in this panel. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you. I mean,
that the alliance actually already exists. It's called Sport Integrity Global Alliance. So we look forward to continue this dialogue with all like-minded organizations, and we welcome their engagement on our activities and their support to move these long overdue reforms forward.
Absolutely. And we're about to hand back to the studio now, but there's just another question come just as we finish. And it's, if the argument against betting sponsorship in football is chiefly about negative social consequences, at what point does alcohol and fast food sponsorships get targeted to? And the honest answer is, I think, and this highlights the issue that we have, is anything that has the ability to cause harm should be regulated properly, and there needs to be balance. So thank you for listening to today's panel, and I will hand back now to the studio. Cheers, guys. Thank you.